Thanks very much, Elaine. It seems strange seeing people when they're not doing a presentation live, but thank you nonetheless very much for that. It was very interesting. Thank you. So it's now my great pleasure to introduce one of our funders. And I should just say before I introduce him that, of course, we're grateful to all the funders that for both Cochrane UK and Cochrane Ireland. And our colleagues in Cochrane Ireland are funded by the Health Research Board of Ireland and the R&D division of the Public Health Agency in Northern Ireland, and we're grateful for them as funders as well. But as many of you know, the funding for much of the Cochrane activity in the UK comes from NIHR. And so it's a great pleasure to invite Ken Steen, who's the director of the NIHR Evidence Synthesis Programme, to talk to us. And Ken, your title is Cochrane and NIHR, and we're looking forward very much to hearing what you have to say. Thank you very much.
Martin, thank you very much indeed, and thank you for the opportunity to talk at this very interesting meeting. This is my very first virtual conference, and it's been a gas. Thank you. I'm going to talk about Cochrane and NIHR. I'm going to reflect a bit on history, what's gone on over the years, then I want to talk about where we currently are and where I think we should be going in the future. Cochrane is an awesome thing, I have to say. It's an awesome, brilliant phenomenon, and it's undergone an astonishing growth. I've highlighted there the outstanding methods and training development that Cochrane's been responsible for over time. Cochrane is, without question, a major pillar of evidence-based practice, and the fact that it's spread from originally medicine out into so many other fields is a testament to the energy that kicked it off. Now, what's happened over time is obviously, I think it's obvious that an organisation that's grown so rapidly, there has become, you might say, some tensions between is it a collaboration or a corporation? How much is it centralised and how much is it dispersed? I'm not surprised by those things. One thing I would say is that my personal view is that centralisation is not necessarily a bad thing. Indeed, centralising resources, for example, in the editorial function, seems to be enormously sensible, and to address issues of research integrity, and I might touch on that again as I'm going along, and that's rather newer, is also very sensible. And so I sit perhaps more on the centralising rather than dispersing. NIHR and Cochrane have a very long history. And we started funding UK CC, and that grew out of the work of Ian Chalmers. And it was visionary and extraordinary. And we all celebrate that, I'm sure, as time goes on, and will continue to do so. CRG funding came next. So we funded a number of Cochrane review groups. That grew, frankly, in a piecemeal way. And it's difficult to see, and I'm not going to reflect on it in any kind of historical sense, except that I think it grew organically, shall I say. Now, the balance, programme grants and incentive awards then came along, and the balance between infrastructure and programme is very important, and I'm going to return to this in a critical way towards the end of this talk. But here I put on the screen is the balance between infrastructure in the form of the CRGs and programmes and incentive awards, and you can see where the balance currently lies. This is the third presentation that's been made, I believe, to this group. The first one was by Sally Davis in 2013, 8 years ago. She was speaking at the time of the first, I think it was the first or a quinquennial review, and she made the point that this is not a review to take money out of the system. She made some other points that I put up on the screen here as well. Infrastructure and programme grants were just coming along there. She made a point that we don't want you to do things just for the UK. And indeed, as I'll talk in a minute, Tom Wally, who came along next, said the same thing, supporting the global venture that is Cochrane. And that is still remains the case. However, we now have an NIHR Global Health programme, which has come along since since over the last 8 years. Sally made the important point that Cochrane is not the only player, and that has changed. And indeed, that's moved on, I would say. And she made a point about real practitioners helping to spread the evidence base. My personal belief is that real practitioners getting involved is a really good way of building evidence-based practice. Sally's other point that I put up there was about will it make a difference? And in that sense, she's saying do prioritization. She set a number of challenges. Basically, they come, I would say, she says, be timely. Don't forget quality. Have impact. Social care, people, is important. Open access. She also said, be iconoclastic. And I'm going to return to the issue of iconoclasm in a little while. Then you had Tom Whalley come and talk to you in 2017. Tom made the point that Cochrane is not a sacred cow. He did that in the context of a comprehensive spending review and saying that everybody has to demonstrate value to the Treasury, otherwise no money will follow. And that has not changed. There is another CSA underway now, and the need to demonstrate value to maintain funding has not changed in any way. Tom highlighted the need to integration with social care. He said we need to make reviews more available. And again, I'll touch on that as I go along, but touch on it because it's perhaps too hot to go any further with at this point. Promoting evidence-based practice as a key role for Cochrane, that hasn't changed. And I salute the extent to which Cochrane is still doing that and is still felt to be very much part of the promotion of it. He asked a question about the current structure. And I wonder whether the cherished CRG structure is indeed one of the cherished icons within that Tom wanted to highlight for the iconoclasts in that room and indeed in this room. Then there was the Kleiner Review. Now that was pretty much current when Tom was talking to you back then. And here are a number of the Kleiner Review's recommendations. Kleiner said that Cochrane should stick to its defined niche. And I think perhaps you might regard that as being systematic reviews of trials, RCTs of interventions. And that's changed clearly. I would disagree with the line of the Kleiner recommendation in that. I think that bird has flown. Cochrane has produced a large number of products, all of which very much have their place. The Kleiner said focus on these 4 R's. Now, relevance raises the issue of empty reviews, which has been a running sore in conversations like this that have happened over the last years. And I'm very happy to say that the proportion of empty reviews has gone down. Empty reviews do highlight a need for research. And so but there are other ways of doing that. NIHR struggles sometimes with the research recommendations from Cochrane reviews, I should point out. And so there is perhaps work to do in relation to that. Against the title of being rigorous there, I would say one thing that wasn't, I think, front and central when the Kleiner Review was going on was the issue of scientific integrity. And I'm really pleased to say that's something that has changed over the last few years. And I'm delighted to see now a much clearer focus on scientific integrity and how the collaboration should deal with that. And that's to some extent in response to it being pointedly raised by people within the collaboration about how important it is to ensure that there isn't garbage going into a review. Otherwise, your review will be garbage. Consider reorganising UK CRGs, Kleiner said. There's going to be, this is a bit of a recurring theme. I hope you're already picking up a bit of a recurring theme here in terms of the structure. I gave a talk yesterday in which I didn't say it, but it was on my slides that there was I wonder whether there is too much structure in Cochrane. I'll come back to that in a moment as well. Address priority setting was also something that Kleiner said. And I'm pleased to say that I think that has improved greatly. And address timeliness. I'm going to say a bit more about that. Then there's what NIHR needs to do. And funding should be based on performance. Yes, and we do try and base funding on performance. But the way in which we carry out the funding is by episodic infrastructure funding for the most part, which isn't very flexible. There is also an issue which Tom raised actually, which is about how we measure quality in relation to Cochrane reviews. We used to measure number rather more than anything else. And so, large numbers of empty reviews was able to deliver a signal to NIHR that said that this was good. And that's been turned around, which is good. But nevertheless, it is difficult for us to assess quality in an ongoing way and flexible. working with UKCC and the editor-in-chief to achieve strategic aims. I would say that has continued to go on, and we have close relationships, and that's great. Again, having fewer but larger groups goes back to this issue of structure. Stop funding underperforming groups. Again, is difficult according to how often we look at performance in a way that allows us to change the direction of funding. And also letting groups compete for funding is simply quite difficult to achieve in the current model that we have. Moving on now to the great thing that is the Strategy 2020. I reviewed this, I looked through this as I was preparing this talk, and it is, I think, a really interesting and commendable document. Here are a few things that sang out to me in it. The global emphasis. Cochrane really is a global venture, and I believe that's changed over the last 5-10 years, perhaps. I'm sure, and this is a very good thing. The range of products that Cochrane is producing is excellent. I think it's really great, and there's some really exciting things in there that are developing the enthusiasm of people. Cochrane International Mobility, for example, is a really tremendous product. Organizational change. I think the collaboration has, you could say, become simpler, and networks are supposed to be, it seems to me, a way of making the collaboration simpler. But I would challenge whether that has worked, at least in the context of the UK. And I'll say a bit more about that in a minute. The focus on impact is clearly enormously helpful. I think that goes to prioritization, and it goes to what Sally was saying, make a difference. And prioritization has been a big deal, I think, in Cochrane has got better. The COVID-19 response, obviously, there wasn't a strategic objective to have a pandemic, but one having come along, I do think the collaboration should be proud of the way in which it's contributed to the scientific response to the COVID pandemic. And we should all be proud, I think, of that. So let me focus a little bit on things that I think have been going well. I think having structure and function reviews is a very good idea, a very necessary step. And I think it's sensible to have done that. However, I do wonder whether there are some ossified structures in place, and I worry the extent to which NIHR may have colluded in allowing them to persist for as long as they have. Editorial integrity and efficiency seems very important. The blurred line between being an author and an editor is something that people are worried about in Cochrane, and I think you're quite right to be worried about that. The fast track and the central editorial services, I think, is a very sensible move. It worries me that there is duplication of function, editorial function that exists at the level of CRGs, and there is also editorial function that is centralized. For me, raises some very important issues about how the collaboration is going about its work and avoiding duplication, being efficient. The research integrity team, again, I touched on that, and I think that's an extremely good venture. Prioritization processes have improved, I've no doubt. We see that particularly in programs, which seem to be much more explicit about the prioritization. Training is great. Business planning and objectives on the whole are met. But I do have to tell you, in terms of judging, it's very hard. We get a whole bunch of feedback from each individual CRG around whether they have met their objectives. We then have to try and synthesize that within NIHR to come to a conclusion about how well the overall investment is going. And I think there is evidence of improved networking, but as I say, I am slightly worried about the layer of bureaucracy that's represented in the networks. The guidelines, the extent to which Cochrane continues to inform guidelines is fantastic, and there's been a talk this morning a bit about that with NICE. The WHO is clearly drawing on Cochrane heavily, and NICE, it's not without its downsides, and I don't know whether the talk earlier on mentioned the need to get copyright permission for reproduction. let me move on to some of the things that I think are still challenging in 2021. First of all, open access. This is a live issue. NIHR is in the process of finalising its policy on open access. Some of you will have seen the welcome policy on open access. There is a problem for Cochrane as I speak in relation to the Cochrane Library and whether if we were to embrace all of open access as Plan S perhaps would want us to do, or indeed if we were to follow Wellcome in developing a policy, there may be a challenge for Cochrane in meeting the needs for open access. Social care hasn't gone away and is still, I think, a very big challenge. If I look out over the evidence collectives that exist around the world and think about social care, obviously you think Campbell. There are some exciting developments between Campbell and Cochrane that have happened over time. If I'm frank, I'm surprised there have not been more. The Methods Group, I know, have worked together and there's a collaboration around in ageing, but I'm surprised that social care hasn't formed more of a focus for potential work in developing summaries of syntheses of evidence. I think the number of CRGs is really an issue, a really big issue. The Kleiner Review, high level, first priority conclusion, which everybody wants to remember, is that Cochrane is good value for money. I wouldn't dispute that, but I would say let's read on a bit. Kleiner said, improve it by changes to quality, prioritization and structure. I don't think the obsession with quality has got any less in Cochrane. I think there is an understanding that sometimes the best can be the enemy of the good. Sally quoted Voltaire 8 years ago. There is a balance to achieve. And I would go back to transparency as being the solution. If you think there is anything which a reader needs to know in relation to the assessment and delivery of quality, then let's just be transparent about that. Prioritization, I think, has improved greatly. Structure, however, I am not so sure. Now, Tom Whalley said that NIHR work with Cochrane to ensure that the configuration is optimal. We have not achieved that. And that may be part of the reason for that, rather, may be that we have separate contracts with each CRG and with UKCC. I don't think UK Coordinating Centre Cochrane Centre has got a role that has emerged to allow collaboration around that. Then I think variation in performance is quite a significant issue. And I wanted to share a little bit of data about that, which causes me some concern. This slide shows the numbers and time to publication for new reviews. I emphasize these are new reviews. So where you see a 0 there, clearly there may have been some updates. But what I would point out are a few things. First, the impact of COVID in 2020 has been less when I look at this data than I would have expected. And so I really congratulate people for making the effort in what has been a really difficult time. The second thing I would say is that there are a significant issue around variation between the different Cochrane review groups in the number of reviews that they are completing, new reviews. I think the variation in this slide is enormous. The next thing I would say is the time. The time to production has not got any better over the last 5 years. Let me just say that. And again, the range is quite striking across the different Cochrane review groups. I would say that there is one review group that we are funding, which has produced, I believe, only one review over the last 2 years after a gestation of many, many months. This sort of variation is very hard for me to ignore as a director of a programme that is making an investment using public money. So I'm very concerned about that. Timeliness is an issue, which again is one that's been raised often. And I just wanted to put this up as I think this is a shocking slide. I'm sorry, Cochrane. What this shows is that 3/4 of the programmes that we have funded in NIHR have not met their delivery times, the delivery times that they said they would meet. 3/4 have not. and that has not changed. There's an asterisk next to 2016 there because these programs haven't yet finished. And so I think it's unlikely that they will make the time shorter, but they might. The delay in delivery time in number of months is also, I think, worrying. The average delay has reduced over time, and there may be some consolation for me in that. But it's not that reassuring overall. For me, the impact of delays is the worry. How much has that reduced the usability of reviews in context, and therefore reduced the impact of the reviews? I would go back to the comments that have been made by my predecessors in terms of being a UK funder, which is that impact is what we're interested in seeing. So links with guideline groups are excellent, but landing the review at the right time to inform impact is what's important. We don't really know as much as I would like to know about the performance, because we commissioned a program with different elements within the program. We don't know how long each of those elements might take to perform, to be done, and to meet their particular purpose. And that's an issue about the nature of program funding. So I'm moving here towards something of a conclusion. I think there is a need for change. NIHR has supported Cochrane Review Groups more or less in their current form for 20, 25 years. The role of UKCC in sort of brokering activities has not emerged. And that would be limited in any event because of the nature of the contracts between NIHR and Cochrane entities. We cannot subcontract. So I'm not in a position to say we will contract with UKCC and UKCC will then carry out subcontracts. That is not open to us within the contracting mechanisms that are available within NIHR. The size and the shape of CRG resources, I think, simply needs to change. This was recognised in 2013 by Sally Davis. It was recognised in the Kleinin Review. It was mentioned by Tom Wally. And I've been saying this since I came into this post 3 years ago. And I know that the people with whom I've talked have heard me say that. But we still have the same CRGs. And we have an additional network, I'm calling it a layer here, of organisational complexity on top. And I worry about that. The promise of the networks, in my view, has not been realised. I can't see a route to it being realised as I sit here now. I don't want to be too ahead of the game, and it may be that it's just around the corner, but I'm not sure that it is really. I do think we have a problem in the amount of structure that we are continuing to support. I increased the CRG allocation in 2018. And at that point, I did try and emphasize, as indeed Tom did, that there's a break point in the contract. And I would do the same right now. I would also make the observation, and this goes back to Cochrane not being the only kid in town. The UK environment is now more competitive, and competition is unavoidable. We have, in my view, the best evidence synthesis capacity in the world, or at least I think I could argue that fairly convincingly. And it's not constrained to Cochrane groups. Cochrane, however, includes really the very best. And so competition should not be a frightening prospect in any way. So here's my simplest analysis of the problem. It's a problem of balance. Broadly speaking, we have two elements that we commission, and they need to be in a helpful and positive balance. And I don't think that is the case. We fund infrastructure and we fund programs of reviews. At the moment, as I showed you in my first slide, there is more infrastructure being funded than programs of review that contain specific activities. And I don't think that's right. CRGs have control over their own work, and that's maybe not such a good thing. When I look at the variation in performance across the CRGs, some of them are brilliant. They really are. Some of the brilliant ones that are supported and led by UK evidence synthesizers, if I could coin the phrase, aren't actually groups that are located in this country. So there is something of a muddle, a mess, a challenge within all of that activity. As a commissioner, I can't direct the work of individual CRGs. We have a contract with the CRG, we look at it, we try to manage the performance of that. We do our level best in that respect, but it is difficult. And the role of the UKCC, as I've said, is limited in this, in terms of linking together the bits of infrastructure. The programs are, to some extent, more attractive. If I'm thinking about this balance, there's much improved prioritization, there's more transparency about intent and progress, there's a clearer link to specific impacts. I would, however, not fail to say the delivery is disappointing in some cases, and I would refer you to my previous slide. Currently, most of our investment is infrastructure. I think that is the problem of balance. This is what I suggest as the way forward. I'm told that it's very offensive to put red text in a presentation. It's regarded as aggressive and unhelpful. Well, I've put this in red because I want to emphasize NIHR's investment in evidence synthesis is not going to change. So the investment that the program that I direct distributes will remain the same. However, we are going to do something at the break point in the CRG contracts, which is in 2 years' time. I want to emphasize, perhaps I should put it in red, the degree of change has yet to be decided. But the move will be to shift the proportion of resource available for specific reviews and programs of reviews, and move away from a balance dominated by infrastructure towards one that is more equitable, as I would see it, or is more balanced between deliverables that are more clearly defined. And then I think the other thing to emphasize is that allocating the resource that will remain within this program will be a competitive process. And so there could be more than Cochrane as potential providers for the work that we will want to see in evidence synthesis. I appreciate this will be a bit of a shock to some people, but I would say that the writing has been on the wall in this respect for at least 8 years, at least since Tom taught. And over the last 3 years, while I've been doing this job, I don't think it would be, it would be pretty difficult, I think. But there needs to be a few next steps. The first is going to be further discussion between NIHR, the other UK funders, and Cochrane. And we're going to reach a conclusion about the way forward by essentially March next year, a year's time. That will allow 1 year ahead of any changes to the contract. So I'm sorry if this is going to come across as a disruptive, difficult, unhelpful and unsupportive move from NIHR in relation to Cochrane. But I would go back to the very top of my talk here, which is to say that the value of Cochrane, what it has done, remains, I think, extraordinary. I personally am a keen supporter of Cochrane, but I'm a keen supporter of other evidence collectives. I'm a really keen supporter of evidence-based practice, a massive supporter of evidence synthesis that lands at the right time to influence decisions and change the course of people's health. In that respect, I regard this work that I'm doing with you, Cochrane, as very much part of my mission as a public health physician. And that's all I have to say today. Thank you.
Ken, thank you very much. You've given us lots to think about there. And let me be the first on behalf of Cochrane to say how grateful the organisation is for the fact that NIHR has funded it to such a great extent for 25 or so years. The organisation is certainly very grateful for that. And we look forward to talking to you and discussing some of the things that you've been, we'd like to discuss, I think, all the things you've talked about in the weeks and months ahead. And, there's such a thing as disruptive innovation, isn't there? Let's hope that perhaps that's one of the things that we can all agree about and talk about. Unfortunately, there are no time for specific questions because we've come to the end of the time and come to the end of the session. We will keep the questions. And I know that I'm sure that if Carla were sitting next to me on a platform here, she would be nodding. I'm sure there's an opportunity for us to go away, think about what you've said, come back to you, talk to people about the sorts of questions they'd like answers to. And between us, we will do this in the sort of collaborative way, which I think has characterized a lot of the interactions that we've had in the last few years over this, when we've been talking about the arrangements between NIHR and Cochrane. So we look forward to that. But that is the end of the session, I'm afraid. I hope that everyone who's been here has enjoyed what has, of course, been a unique event for us. We'd love to hear people's feedback about the way that this event has worked. I imagine some people are just desperate to get on a plane or a train or in a car and meet people face to face, while other people might be very keen that this sort of thing continues. So please do give us your feedback. If you'd like to watch any of the presentations in the previous sessions, the recordings will be available on this platform until the 22nd of May. And we hope thereafter they'll be available on something like the UK Cochrane Centre YouTube channel or something like that. But again, please give us your feedback. We'll be circulating a survey to collect that very shortly. But thank you again for joining Virtually Cochrane, and please enjoy the rest of the day and the week. Thanks very much. Bye.